All right, so it's 12 o'clock, so we'll get the ball rolling. So thank you everybody for joining us for this NTI conversation. And the theme is Country as Teacher in the Reimagining of Australian Education. And to start with, I'd just like to acknowledge that my name is Elizabeth and I'm a lecturer here at Nan Tien Institute. And this is on the traditional lands of the Wadi Wadi people, who have lived here for over 70,000 years, caring for the land and the waters and all the beings that have lived here. And so I just wanted to take a moment for all of us to just recognize and acknowledge the traditional lands wherever we are, wherever we're dialing in from or stand right now. And I'd just like to really extend my thanks to the Wadi Wadi people and all of the traditional custodians who have taken for so long taken such good care of the land, waters, landscape that we're so fortunate to be living in here in this region. And I extend my deep respect to the elders past, present, and future, and especially to our Wadi Wadi Elder who's with us here, Aunty Barbara Nicholson. Really happy to have you and to have all three speakers. And so usually at the beginning of a class or an event here at Nan Tien Institute, we tend to do a mindful pause for a minute or two. Instead of that today, I just want to invite everybody for us to take our time and to listen also to the silence, to the silences in the room, in the speakers. And we've got about an hour or an hour and a half, as long as it keeps going for. So I'll just start by very briefly introducing our speakers and then invite our speakers to speak on their own behalf to introduce the work that they do and how it connects to the theme. And so to start with, we've got Aunty Barb, Aunty Barbara Nicholson, who, as you probably know, was the Wollongong Citizen of the Year last year. She has an Honorary Doctorate in Laws from the University of Wollongong and has been working for a long time in many skillful, creative ways at social justice for the First Peoples of Australia. And especially in the last decade or so, she's started this Black Wallaby project, which collects and fosters and publishes arts and creative writing from First Nations inmates in prisons in New South Wales. We've got Dr. Anthony McKnight, who is an Awabakal and Gumaroi and Yuin Cultural Man, who's the curriculum transformation lead in the Indigenous Strategies unit, as well as associate professor at the University of Wollongong. And we've got Barbara Lepani, who's an old Dharma friend of mine, a woman of many colors and many stories of a life of deep cross-cultural relationship, very deep cross-cultural relationship across the Asia Pacific. And especially through Tibetan Buddhism, she's done at least 3 years of meditation retreat. For one period, it was a deliberate 3-year period of a meditation retreat. So very much steeped in a contemplative Buddhist tradition, but also has worked a lot to, inspire cultural change in Australia, really looking to the inspiration of the caring for country ethos of our First Nations people. And so Aunty Barb, are you happy to share with us the work that you do and how long have we got?
As long as you need. I've got a cuppa.
Thank you for that lovely introduction and your acknowledgement. I appreciate very much the care you've put into that. Thank you. Okay, look, I'm actually no spring chicken, just in case you hadn't noticed. And I've been an activist for Aboriginal rights for I got into it in the 1970s, very early, go back to the Tent Embassy, the original Tent Embassy in Canberra. It didn't stop. You develop different interests and different things tug at your heartstrings. And one of the things that tugged at mine, or there were two major things that tugged at my heartstrings, and one of them had to do with the stolen generations, which I was very active in getting the formation of Link Up New South Wales, which is the organisation that got set up to locate and reunite the stolen generations. And I was on the board of that for 23 years, when then I decided that I just needed to let go of some things and let other people. But concurrently, at the same time, I was a founding member of the Aboriginal Deaths in Custody Watch Committee in Sydney. We formed out of a previous organisation that was called the Committee to Defend Black Rights, which was set up by non-Aboriginal people, but I can't remember the exact date, but it was eventually handed over into Aboriginal hands, and it was reinvented then as the Aboriginal Deaths in Custody Watch Committee. We formed that then due to the death in custody of a 16-year-old boy in police custody in Fremantle in Western Australia. And that young fellow was by the name of John Pat, and he was brutally beaten and found dead on the floor of the cell, the police cell. And we've been lobbying for years to get a Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. The death of John Pat was the catalyst that actually changed the government mind, and we finally got that. And I've been involved with the Watch Committee for many, many years, and at varying levels of time, I was the chair or the secretary or the gopher, whatever was needed. I have an abiding and enduring commitment and interest in addressing the over-incarceration rates of Aboriginal people, men, women and children in this country, and their treatment within that system, and the appalling rate of deaths in custody. We got that Royal Commission back in those days. We got it, when it was completed, there were 339 recommendations that, if implemented, would definitely have change on the rate of deaths in custody, the rate of incarceration, etc. Sad to say that hasn't changed. There's an increasing number of deaths in custody. There's even at the incarceration rates last year alone in the year 2023-24 financial year, the incarceration rate for Aboriginal people across male, female, children went up by 15%. That is huge. That is absolutely massive. That is just last year alone. And the rates of death in custody just don't change. So that's been my interest. But I'm also an educator. And I've been a university lecturer for many years. I retired long ago, but I still get called on every now and again to give a guest lecture. But during the time with the Aboriginal Deaths in Custody Watch Committee, we had many contacts within the prison system, and the educator within me was able to identify the immense interest the lads and lasses inside have in wanting to write, and they're quite prolific. The writing is one of the few things you can do in a jail when you are an inmate. It's one of the very few things that you have the latitude to do. If you can get a pen or a pencil and some paper, very scarce commodities within the prison system. So I noticed that, and so fast forward some years, and now I'm in year 14. 14 years ago, I started a program at Junee Correctional Centre. Junee is in the Riverina area, not far from Wagga Wagga, if that helps you locate. And I'd had connections with the prison authorities there. And so I was able to go, they invited me to go one NAIDOC week to do some creative writing workshops, and I did that, and I'll never go in NAIDOC week ever again because it is bone-rattlingly cold in June at that time of the year, and I got so ill. You know, I think the cold got into my bones and took me 3 weeks to recover. But I started off some creative writing workshops there, and I just wanted to do something that I had no idea it was just going to be that for that year, and that was going to be it, and a one-off thing. But then I had the notion that I should get a little desktop publication out of the work that the inmates had done during those workshops. And so I did. And I got a little book out. The story of the book itself was quite interesting. Volume 1, it wasn't going to be called Volume 1. We called it Dreaming Inside because the inmate writers actually decided that among themselves, that that's what we should call it. But I was associated and a long time member of the South Coast Writers Centre, and the director of the centre at the time worked very closely with me, and we toiled away to get these very scrappily handwritten manuscripts and typed up and made into something that resembled a book. And we worked quite hard because neither one of us knew what we were doing anyway. So we got finally got to a point where we thought it was good enough, and the university had agreed to print for us. And we were in, Ricky, the director of South Coast Writers Centre at the time, we're in her office, which at the time was located on campus. And we got it as good as we thought we could do. And she said, okay, will I send it? And she had a finger on the key ready to press send, and she was about to do it, and I said, stop. And she said, what? I said, put Volume 1 on that. And I have really ambivalent feelings. I wish to goodness I'd never said that, because I've worked so hard because I'm about to launch Volume 13. And I've brought along posters for you to have a look at. And the launch will be, the posters will be there. The launch is coming up on the 22nd of May at Wollongong Art Gallery in the evening. And of course, we'd love to see you there if you'd love to come. So we're launching 2 books, one from Junee, Volume 13 from Junee Correctional Centre, which is a male prison, but there are a couple of female inmates represented in the book. And Dilwinia, women's prison, there's a book from them, which, so we're launching the 2 books on that night. That's what I've been up to since I retired, and I use that word cautiously. So, over to you.
Yeah. So Anthony, are you happy to share your work? And
If that's all right with both the arts. Yep.
Sorry?
Is that all right? Did I speak? Yep. My name is Darlawan, which is great white shark. I'm pretty cruisy. I don't think I don't need the bite. But my English name is Anthony McKnight, and I hold both because I hold both. My mother's Awabakal Gumaroi, and then you've got Yuin as well, and then you've got my father who's English Irish, Scottish and English. So I can't separate myself. And that's how I've been taught, that our culture is about connections and not separation. That's what colonisation gave us, was the separation. So we've got to unlearn the separation and relearn the connection, how everything is connected in oneness. And I didn't realise this until about 15 years ago now. I was talking to Aunty Grace Crosley, who was a significant teacher for me and still is a significant teacher for me. And about 15 years ago, she said to me, "Do you remember being at the Bombardary Velodrome and when you were about 7? And I kind of got there and went, "Oh, vaguely, not really, no." And she said, "Me and a couple of the other old aunties identified you were going to become a teacher."
When you were a child.
When I was 7. And I had no idea. I just kind of went, "Yeah, okay." And then it wasn't until I got older where I realised some of the stuff that Auntie did made sense. And it wasn't just a teacher in the white system. It was that, and it was also a teacher in the culture. And then when I got older again, an uncle then came in, who's now left his suitcase and gone to the spirit world, taught me as well how to be a teacher again in both ways. And that's all about how and Auntie here has also taught me a lot as well. When I met Aunt when I was a little bit older, but she's been a significant teacher as well. And how I've been at the university, I left the university because it was so toxic, at another university. And then I ended up 3 years later coming to the University of Wollongong. And I got there and I went, "Okay, old fellas, you got me back here again." So the ancients, what I mean by old fellas, and that's not just, that's old, the old women and the old men got me back here. And I even tried to leave after being a year or two, and Uncle Max, in no it made it very clear that I was going nowhere. Because I wasn't sure if I could share what I was going to share. But Unc made it very clear that I was to stay here and share that. We got to give it away to keep it. So I'm going to give Aunt here $10 or everyone here $10 so I can keep it. And I didn't get that when he first told me that. "I'm going to give you $10 so I can keep it." And nearly every year I get a little bit deeper understanding of what he meant by that. There's not just one answer. And that's what our education system is about. They just give us a little bit and you've got to figure it out. As Auntie Carol Speechley says, them old people gave us 1, they gave us plus, they gave us 1. Maybe they gave us equal, what that means, but they never gave us the answer. And I can remember ringing up Uncle Max once. "Remember 16 years ago, Unc, when you did this and that?" And he went, "Yeah, I got it." And he just went, "Oh, yeah."
Took a while.
Yeah. And there's other things that have taken 2 minutes or 2 seconds and others 3 or 4 years. But I had to earn the knowledge. And what else he taught me, and if he got there and he went, "Oh, you mob haven't got that yet." Oh. So instead of blaming us, instead of pointing the finger, he would look at himself. "Oh, I've got to change how I'm teaching that then." He always brought it back to, "Oh, I've got to change the ways I'm teaching." But he, in a way, didn't teach. He did, but his main teaching was us, to learn how country is teacher and how country is knowledge system. People said to me recently, aren't you sad that the old fellow wasn't able to share everything that he was going to share to you? And we went, no,
No, not at all.
he shared us a lot, but the main thing he taught us was how to read the text of the land, how to see how country speaks without voice, how to look, listen and see. And I'm still learning how to look, listen and see. I'm still learning to read the text of the land. I'm still learning how to, how country speaks without voice. Even though he introduced me to that 30 years ago, I'm still learning. And I love learning. Because that's what a teacher is. Because country is teacher.
Mm.
So that's how what I've been doing and what I'm still doing now is introducing people who now call this place home to the knowledge system that it's existed here since the beginning of time and that our people were very much aware of. But because of colonisation, not all of our people are aware of it now. So it's about bringing our own Aboriginal people, but also non-Aboriginal people. Because if we separate, then we're not following what our culture is about. And then that becomes tricky within the Western knowledge system and the politics of that. It becomes tricky, the politics.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether it's our own politics or the Western, it makes it tricky. But I'm only doing what I've been taught. So yes, I think I'll stop there and pass on the.
Thanks, Anthony. Well, I guess I bring three streams to this conversation. Elizabeth's already mentioned that I've been a long-term Buddhist practitioner and student. And it's a bit like what you were talking about, Anthony. There's no end point in that learning on a Buddhist journey because there's layers upon layers of unlearning that you have to do in order to reveal deeper and deeper inner truths. And a lot of that aligns quite closely with what you're talking about, is learning how to listen to a voice that isn't a human language voice, that deep inner listening that opens up a space of being able to enter into a different dimension of what I would call sensibility. The other stream for me is that when I was young, I met and married a fellow university student from the Trobriand Islands of Papua New Guinea. So I found myself in Papua New Guinea in the 70s as it transitioned to self-government and independence, where I was the stranger. So I encountered a pre-industrial culture that was still very much under the colonial control of Australia, but I encountered it as an in-law to an Indigenous culture. So I found myself, all of the things that I had learned at university were completely useless when I went to the village. So I realized it was a sort of very humbling experience to become the stranger and to learn that many of the things I knew counted for next to nothing. And I had one important lesson from my father-in-law once when we were walking back from a village where we'd been to visit some old ladies that were believed to have certain miraculous powers, and everyone was a bit nervous as we walked back through a sort of on a jungle track in a small island called Vakuta Island in the middle of the Pacific between the mainland of Papua New Guinea and Bougainville. And my husband had told me that his father had protective magic that he'd inherited from his father. So I was trying to get this out of him. So I said, oh, everybody else is very frightened, but you're not afraid. Why is that? And he looked at me with a twinkle in his eye and he said, I've noticed that you dim-dims, which was the word for Europeans, are heavy to these things. So in my head, I pretend I'm a European. And I'm just like, I don't know, something just sparked in my mind. And I suddenly realized that I was amongst people that were alive to a world that I was heavy to.
By heavy mean, like,
I couldn't sense it. My sensibility was blocked because of the way I'd been brought up in terms of what I thought reality was. And of course, the other journey that I bring to this story is that I did a master's degree in science and technology studies at the University of Wollongong, which gave me the opportunity to learn about the history of Western thinking that came about through the scientific revolution. So I now live in the Blue Mountains, and one of the things that with a bunch of people we run is something called the Enlivenment Network. And our central purpose is how to help people make a paradigm shift from the dominant modern way of thinking, which I would call competitive individualism and techno-rationalism, which blocks that sensibility. How to shift their entire consciousness to, I mean, we draw on the work of Andreas Weber to what he calls biopoetics, but I call the recovery of mythopoetic sensibility. And when we talk about teacher as country, I think the big shift that we have to make is country is not the environment. Country is all of creation. It's the song, you know, we talk to Aboriginal people when they describe the meaning of country, which is why it's always capitalized, is we have to get away from this modern idea that there's humans on one side and there is environment on the other that we're taking care of or not taking care of. Country's family. We are part of, it's the whole of creation of which we human beings are simply one part. So when we're destroying the environment, if we like, as separate, we're actually destroying our family. We're destroying ourselves. And one of the other big lessons that I've learned, it's really, I mean, I think it's probably common amongst many Aboriginal people, but I first learned about it from Mary Graham, who's an Aboriginal elder from Queensland. And she talked about this shift from a extractivist logic to a relationist logic. And the extractivist logic, you know, when they talk about productivity is what can I get from this situation? Now, how can I make money from this? What can this person give me? So our entire relationship to country, which we've recast as merely being the environment, has been it's either good for wealth creation, we either dig it up or we farm it or we fish it, or it's good for leisure and pleasure. But either way, we're extracting from it for our human benefit because we see human beings as the exceptional species, what you might call human exceptionalism, instead of being part of a wider world. And for me, I spent a year working with Uncle Bob Randall, actually helping him write his autobiography. So we spent a lot of time talking about similarities and differences between a sort of Buddhist worldview and the worldview that he was also an educator who tried to help non-Indigenous people understand the Indigenous perspective. He was a Yankunytjatjara man from Central Australia. I travelled with him all back through his country as part of that kind of work I did in working with him on his autobiography, which was published in 2003 as Songman. But what I learned from him was that this way of thinking about the separation, you know, whether it's humans to environment, whether it's man to woman, like the entire Western knowledge system divides everything up as dualistic rather than relational. And that the fundamental principle was relationalism or relationist. And that's the big shift that I think we're now having to learn to make. And it very much aligns with the Buddhist perspective on interdependence, that all phenomena arises through interdependent origination, you know, everything, nothing separate. And this relates to the really deep law that I've come to understand, particularly when I work with Uncle Bob, is that why many Aboriginal cultures refer to what they call law with a capital L actually equates with a deep, deep understanding of the ecological principles by which all of planet Earth operates. The whole of creation is actually governed by that law of relationalism. So we move from a kind of idea of evolution as the survival of the fittest, which is, you know, might takes right, winner takes all, to the survival of the most fitting, where we realize that all the way from an ace predator animal right down to a parasite all play their part in the dance of creation in this relational world that we live in. And I guess we are a pivotal point really in human history at the moment, because right before our eyes, country is talking back to us in very powerful ways through, and it's doing it in two different ways. One is through climate change, which is, you know, completely shaking up the global system. We now realize that we don't live within a bioregionally sustainable manner, that we're creating our own destruction. But interestingly enough, as I was saying to Aunty Barb, one of the interesting things in a country like Australia is that many Aboriginal people have found their voice to speak back to us. And they're doing it through the kind of writing that Aunty Barbara has been supporting, the kind of work that Anthony's doing and bridging that gap in as a teacher in the university system. Many Aboriginal researchers now who are writing really powerful works which are helping someone like me understand what this relationist ethic means, and they're writing in my language that helps me understand it. Because the difficult thing for white fellas, you know, I'm of Anglo, Irish, Danish background. We've always fundamentally believed that our knowledge system and our culture is the height of human cultural evolution. And we've exported our knowledge system to the world. I mean, all global universities work on the Western knowledge system. So, but and we now realize that knowledge system is deeply flawed at a time when many Indigenous people, not just here, but in Canada, Elizabeth's country, are being able to speak back in really powerful ways. So I was in our little enlivenment network, we have a little logo, and it's got a honey eater dropping seeds of relationality. And there's a little diagram of the eel burra. And the story of the Australian eel is a sort of, I think, a sort of metaphor for what we're on about. There's an educational program about it in the Australian Museum in Sydney. So the eels along the river systems of Eastern Australia, they all leave their home and go all the way to the Coral Sea to breed. And then the tiny little baby elders have to swim all the way back. And where I live in the Blue Mountains, they have to come up the Nepean River, and they find their way through the concrete barrier of the Warragamba Dam to Lake Barragarong. And for me, that's a metaphor for how Indigenous knowledge systems are now talking back to modern Australia. If only we could listen. And so that's my sort of message really about country as teacher, that it involves what Anthony's talked about, the ability to deeply listen, but that involves silence. It involves coming into a deeper space of awareness. You have to take the headphones off, get off the podcasts, put your Facebook feed aside, and find a different space to be.
That's very interesting. And thank you for that, Barbara, because Anthony and I have both been involved more in recent times in a research project that came out of the law school at Wollongong University. And that research project is about deep listening. And we really did a lot of work on that, didn't we? And incorporated into that, you know, in all the sessions that we had with the chief investigator in that research, which was Professor Nan Tien. You know, we explored what I called the need to listen to the silences. If you listen to the silences and focus on that, and you're right, put all the devices, turn them off, lock them away, put them in the microwave and press 10, whatever, but just get rid of all the external noise from around you and just listen deeply. It's deep listening, and out of deep listening comes revelation. And that business of listening to the silences. So the deep listening is something that you do yourself. The listening to the silences is also something you do by yourself, but you are listening to someone else's silence. And we found this many, many times. I can go back to what I call my Annus Horribilis, which was 1998, and we had 8 close-up members in our family passed away that year. We just staggered from funeral to funeral to funeral, you know, didn't have time to grieve one before the next one, etc. And one of those deaths was my beloved young niece, and she was 31, and she had 2 children, a little boy who just turned 6 and a little girl who was not quite 1. And she was born with a congenital heart condition in Shell Harbour Hospital. Right? All of her medical stuff, all her life, was attached to Shell Harbour Hospital. They had every bit of detail about her condition. She developed pneumonia, was rushed off to hospital, and they began treating her and treated her with drugs that were counterintuitive to her heart medicine. Right? And she passed away in the hospital under their care. We had the Health Complaints Commission come in on it. We had the Indigenous Social Justice Association come into it because she should not have been given that medicine. All her records were there. It was really traumatic, right? Entirely traumatic. We had these meetings at the hospital with all the authorities, which was then Illawarra Area Medical Health and Shoalhaven Medical Health. I think they were combined at the time, and it was the same thing but a different title, you know. And the Health Complaints Commission, the officials from the hospital itself down there, etc. And even someone from Child Welfare came in, and I don't to this day understand what their role was in coming there. But we were having this thing, and my cousin, the mother of the deceased niece, we were in total grief. And they were firing bullet point questions at them, and they were just not listening to what we were saying. I had to stop it. I couldn't bear what was happening. My cousin Heather was in absolute turmoil. Because she was getting this barrage of questions, just totally wrong. And so I just interrupted the whole proceedings and demanded they stop. You just need to listen. You can't do this. You just cannot fire questions like this. You need to listen to the way in which people need to be heard. And that's another aspect of listening, is to listen. Heather's way of responding to a question is to contextualize the answer in a story, right? Without the story around it, it's not an answer. She doesn't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. I've got to tell stories all the time. You're getting one right now, you know, and it's this business of not listening. And we had this immense problem with them. And then they wanted to take Heather off into a room on her own because I was this bad force in the room.
You were trouble.
Oh, definitely trouble. And they wanted to take her off in a room on her own. And I thought, no, you don't even do that. You don't get it. You know, it's, you know, the whole family were all there, you know, and we needed that support. Welfare did reveal themselves on that occasion. They were interested in taking the 2 children, and he said, well, no, and as a representative of Link Up as well, which I was very much, I said, no, you don't. No, you don't. There's a family here. You're not taking those children.
You see, this is the level of disassociation. And it's like you're listening with your head, for facts. You're not listening with your heart. You're not,
That's right.
you're not going into relationship with the people. See,
It
it's that
doesn't-
you're cutting off,
Yeah.
and it just causes incredible harm.
That's exactly right. And it did a lot of harm at that occasion. But the business of what I've always identified as Aboriginal people need to be listened to, and you need to listen to Aboriginal people in the way that they need to be heard. If that makes any sense to you. If it doesn't make any sense to you, I haven't explained it well. So, yeah. Anyway, that's just
The other element for me is the seeing.
the
People
sea.
don't know how to see.
Yes.
People know how to look, but they don't know how to see. And that's something, and that's in connection with that deep listening. So it's deep
Yeah.
seeing, it's in connection that if you can't see what is being offered or what's being shared or what's being shown or see the text, then you're missing a whole element of that oneness. If you're just listening even, you also got to see.
You know, it's interesting. One of the fundamental lessons that my Buddhist teacher gave me, and he used to always say, don't mix things up. So he would say, like, one of the things we do in Western ways of learning is that we just add on stuff. We go out and pick and choose bits and we add it on to our existing bundle of knowledge. But when you're trying to learn a different culture or a different way of seeing and looking, you have to put all that to one side. And you have to live with an open heart and an open mind. You have to sort of get rid of all that conceptual story going on in your head about what is and what isn't. Put it to one side and try and listen with an open heart and an open mind in order to create the possibility for what you just said, Anthony.
The unlearning.
Because when you look, what do you see? Because we all know, I mean, educators know that we all think reality is what's out there, it exists in itself, but it's a cultural construction. I mean, our body through our senses pick up phenomena, but the sense we make of it is determined by our culture and how we've been educated. So it's always filtered. So in order to open yourself up to a different way of knowing, which is what you have to do to understand Aboriginal ways of knowing and their knowledge systems, is you have to put all that to one side.
And that's the invitation for people to unlearn.
Yeah.
To look at what are the taken for granted cultural practices that people just take, that everyone understands and everyone does. But what are that's what we invite our students and academics to do, is what are the taken for granted cultural practices that
It
you
does a lot of
exist
that.
in.
Yeah, and it's a heavy system. I mean, one of the things I wanted to mention here was the work of a little program in the Blue Mountains. There's a school up there called Kindle Hill, and they run a program called Baran Nalgara, where they're actually taking their senior students within the school and they're trying to teach them in the way that Anthony talked about. So they've been working with Uncle Lex Dad on this, and when they do geography, they go along a whole river system, and it's called Grandmother. They listen to Grandmother River. And so they've integrated their curriculum into experiential learning, solving problems that matter with community. So they're trying to rejig the entire curriculum into a relational process, and one which deeply respects in Aboriginal ways of knowing. So it's sort of an interesting program that they're running there. And so I just wanted to give a little shout out to them, because it's a unique experiment that they're doing. But the students won't end up with an ATR, but they will end up with a portfolio, which, as we know, Anthony, there are many ways now to get into a university other than through an ATR, if that's the path you want to follow.
Anthony, I'm really curious how you teach this, listening to the land, the text of the land, or seeing, the story and in the university. When you're in the University of Wollongong, how are you teaching to listen deeply?
There's a range of things. You share some of the cultural teachings that you got permission to share, but you also invite them to slow down. as everyone said, to get rid of the, to be silent, but also, well, often people say when you're being silent, they go to, oh, that means I don't speak. But as most people might know here, that just not speaking doesn't mean you're silent.
No, not at all.
You could be already wondering about what you're going to have for dinner. I've got this assignment to do. What in the hell is this fella on about? He must be from another planet. And I'm there going, no, I'm from this one. But you can see that. You can see that in their body language. You can see that they're sitting with that, but that's fine. To invite them, I can remember one of my colleagues once got there and said, oh, some of your colleagues are scared of you. I kind of went, what? Scared of me? She said, yeah. They're scared of me. And I kind of went, oh, okay. And then she said she's scared of you because you invite them to look at self.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're doing, inviting people to look at self as country, not as the separation that you're talking about.
Mm. Oh, I was only going to comment, but I've had a number of students who were frightened of me too.
Yeah. So
for whatever their reason.
So it's that slowing down and then to observe, like, for example, a tree. You can look at a tree.
Mm.
So when you look at a tree, if we can look at the tree outside, if people online, just have a look at a tree outside and you look at the base of the tree, to the trunk of the tree, all the way up to the branches, and you extend, you're looking to the next size branches, to the next size branches, to the leaf, to the tip of the leaf.
Mm.
That's what you're looking at. Then you can bring in the listening, that deep listening that comes with that. And then you look at the seeing. And what do you see when you look at that tree?
And if in the Buddhist tradition, one of the things that we can add that's a benefit of that is helping people, like one of the ways you train the mind to get out of all of that conceptual noise is by putting your attention on the breath. So when you're with a tree like that, you can also breathe with the tree. And that helps that shift.
That's the similar.
I'm quite an intellectual person. So intellectuals have the biggest trouble in doing this because they've got a huge amount of energy invested in their intellectual knowledge as their identity. So putting all that to one side is a bit of a challenge. And it's all about learning that humility of not knowing, of the open question, of what you talked about with the path of your teachers, that there is no certain point to arrive at where you finally nail things on the head and you've captured it like you've caught a fish. Life is mysterious. It unfolds. It's moving. It's changing. It's not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. And the enjoyment of that, of the ambiguity, of the possibility of not knowing is very freeing, whereas a lot of the intellectual pursuit or corporate pursuit is knowing everything. You're the expert. So it's all about getting rid of expert mind and learning, like, just the incredible freedom of humility, actually, where you don't have to be the expert. And it's letting go of that, I think, is one of the big challenges that we face, Anthony. So it's interesting how you're bringing this into at the tertiary level in working with students to learn that shift.
To not know. And it doesn't matter if you don't. So when you look at a tree, what do you see? I'm going to try and invite people in. So what do you see when you look at a tree? And don't overthink it. So what do you see? You see time? Okay.
Time's taken.
Yep. And that was often the answer we were given if we ever asked why. The old people go, oh, have a look at that tree. And you go, what? You're looking at the tree, and your question might have been something completely different. And then you go, oh, okay. Took a long time for that tree to grow, so it might take me a long time to figure out the answer. But what else can you see when you look at a tree? Don't overcomplicate it. Don't overthink it.
If you're online, feel free to just speak out.
Jump on.
You can unmute yourself and speak out if you're online.
We've got a few answers online. We've got home,
Yep.
water,
Yep.
leaves.
Yeah. What do the leaves give us? What's the gift from the leaves?
Ollie, did you want to answer that?
A lot of things, movement, colour, oxygen,
Yep. Medicine, food.
medicine, yeah.
Cookies. Somebody sees cookies.
Cookies.
Yeah. And picnicking under the tree.
Picnicking under the tree.
Comes to mind.
Yep. So it provides shade, shelter. So the more and more you look at the tree, the more and more you see. And, you know, to see that, you've got to have that look, listening and seeing in that. So what are the gifts of the tree? Then I often ask the question back, and how do we reciprocate to that tree? And I usually don't get as many answers back. So that's what I try and do to try and introduce. That's one of the many things that we try to do, introduce, you know, that as a living, breathing entity. That is a cousin, that could be an uncle, or it could be an auntie, or it is, what I mean, it could be, it is an auntie, it is an uncle, it is all those things. It's a mother. But so that's the invitation then, is how do we reciprocate to something that shares so much to us when we actually slow down to look, listen and see. And then you've got the mountains that are just there, that they're part of the text. If you choose to slow down and look at the text of the land. And one of the most simplest examples of that are the 5 islands. They're the 5 sisters of Jira, and you can see Jira's hair coming down over the top of her with her arms around her legs. You can see her hair coming down.
That's from Jira Mount Kira.
Yeah, Jira, you can see her hair coming down. Because that's the text of the land. We didn't need to write things down because it was written in the landscape.
That actually segues into one the strategy I use in teaching inmates in prison who you need to recognise educationally limited. For the most part, they're behind the 8 ball with education. They have not had the same educational advantage as most people. Okay, so start somewhere. And one of the things that I learned very early was a need for them to understand themselves. So we developed this strategy to get them writing, where they had to discard their identity, their names, didn't want to know who their names were, didn't want to know who their mob was, didn't want any of that. Just now you have to choose what you are from the list of elements. You are wind, sun, moon, stars, water, fire. You are tempest, you are summer breeze, you are this. Choose which something out of the elements that you think you want to be. Now you write me 20 lines on that about yourself. You are wind. You can say, I am wind. I did this and I went there and whatever, and I do this. I have these, list the benefits that you have, list the disadvantages of wind, whatever, you know, or so whichever element you choose, you develop a story about that, about what that is. And invariably, what happens when they start writing like this, they're actually exposing the real events that happened in their life, and they're confronting them and facing them. They've never done that before. So they're getting to know their inner self and how to deal with that. And just in the written word, it's a real step along the way to opening up your heart and mind to other ways of being other than the ways that got them into the situation they're in. So, and it takes them back. And in every case, I always overlay that with, like we'll do a debrief after they've written, a little debrief. How does that relate to your the beliefs of your particular group, a mob, shall we say, you or Reggie, you Dungutty, or whoever you are? You know, how does that relate to your belief systems there? How can you reconcile what you've just written with all that you know? And invariably they do reconcile. So it's quite an interesting.
It is.
And
the wind can do a lot. And
sorry?
the wind can do a lot.
Oh,
when
yeah,
you
so
work
can,
with the
so
wind.
can the king tide. You know, some have chosen to be the king tide. You know, it's a destructive force. And they write about all the destruction that they've caused in their life. You know, so it's owning. It's owning. And in owning, you're growing. You know, once you own your own actions, then you are in a growth situation. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think this is so fabulous. I mean, it reminds me of what I've always thought, like the recovery of what I call mythopoetic, but by becoming the element, you see, you're entering into a different way of experiencing, and then it has its own story that frees you up from this sort of socially constructed conceptual
right.
identity with all of its bullshit. And you're able to open up to something different. I am really impressed with that as a method. That's really fabulous.
Do you find that the friendships in the prison get stronger?
Sorry?
The friendships in the prison, do they get stronger?
I have found invariably over many, many years, not just the 14 years I've been doing this, but many years prior, invariably, the strength of culture within the prisons is so strong. Often it's stronger there than it is on the outside. And simply because of this, in there, it is the one thing, pardon me, it is the one thing they have that can't be taken away from them. No one can take away your belongingness. Right? And so it actually grows and becomes stronger. I've found many, many times, even inmates become more culturally strong while they're inside. And it's an interesting thing that happens, because I've also seen many younger people coming in there who identify as Aboriginal, when this mob, that mob, or perhaps not a mob, but just identifying anyway. And they don't know much because they've been separated. They've not been, they've had the privilege of growing up in a culturally appropriate environment. They've been grown up outside of that. And so they know nothing. And I've even made a comment about it in the introductions to one of the books or more, that they come in there not culturally strong, but they learn from the culturally strong ones in there, and they come out in a much healthier cultural state than they went in, because of that bonding that goes on within that tight control system. Yeah, it's a really interesting concept. Yeah. But it goes,
How much is the creative writing program helping with that?
How much is the creative writing helping with that?
amazing, amazing, because we don't, it's unjudged, it's unedited, it's unjudged. Unedited to the most part, you know, there's certain things by law you can't allow, but so that gets cut out. But it's, they will tell you time and time again in every volume, there will be some mention, oh, this has been the best thing that ever happened. And I felt like a human being. It was the only time since I've been in here that I felt like I was human, because we create a culturally safe environment while we are there, right, in that brief time that we're with them. And they are totally unjudged, and they can speak their own truth, write their, whatever it is they want to write about, you know, and it's a purging for them, and it's a confidence building. I have the thing, I have seen the inmates come into the room and heads down and downcast looks and not very confident and not very interested, and I've seen them walk out 10 feet tall. Yeah, I think that says it. So it doesn't, yeah. At every turn, it's a culturally safe and a culturally appropriate time. I don't do this on my own. I have a team of tutors. We're all Aboriginal, right? And so it just makes an incredible difference. Yeah, yeah.
It's all about that connection.
Sorry?
It's all about the connection.
That's
In
right.
prison,
Yeah.
it's hard.
Very hard, you know, like we go in there, and from the inmates' point of view, I guess, we're a conduit to the outside for a start. You know, we can bring in news from this community or that community or something and share that. You're a trusted person. There's an instant trust. You're also, you know, the aunt or the uncle, and you're the spiritual guide, your mother confessor, you're everything, you know. You become everything to them in the time we're there. Because there's nothing else. There is no other program like this in any jail, in any jurisdiction in this country. This is the only program, and I work in 2 jails and two juvenile justice centres.
So would you like to see this taken up and repeated in other jurisdictions?
I haven't got the energy, darling.
Would you like to see, you know, because I was listening to
Corrective services are really keen for that to happen, but they seem to have the idea that this great big organisation with Elon Musk bank account.
they want someone else to lead it.
But what it is, it's a grassroots thing. So I kick this off. It's a grassroots thing, and I volunteer all my time and energy, and that's what it takes to make this program work. That's one of the things it takes to make this program work. Yeah.
More Aunty Barbs out there.
Well, it's this issue that, I mean, this is another thing that's interesting about, you know, country as teacher, is the tradition within Aboriginal culture of elders who are not doing it as a profession for a fee, but are doing it as part of their role in community as leaders.
That's exactly it.
And you know, that's something that, you know, I don't know how old you are, Aunty Barbara. We're probably something of the same age, but it's something that we non-Indigenous people need to learn as elders. Instead of, you know, going on ocean cruises with our superannuation accounts, why aren't we stepping up to be voluntary elders in our communities? You know, giving back. It's that relational thing of giving back. You know, instead of treating retirement as a sort of fun time, like we can be teenagers again, of stepping up to be elders and adopting that idea of eldership that is so entrenched and ingrained in Aboriginal culture. We have to learn this.
One of the most beautifulest moments that I've seen at the university was we had a tree planting happening at the university. We had a workshop the day before and a presentation of where the water starts.
Mm. It was a good day, that was,
With Richard, with Kuma there and
Mm.
Uncle Bruce and Uncle Greg and
Mm.
other people there. And we had workshops the next day. And academics and people from the community came along and some Aboriginal students from different areas came down. A school from Penrith came down for this. And one of the most beautiful moments was a non-Aboriginal lady, I'd say in her 80s, was sitting on the ground with a young Aboriginal girl, both sharing their stories on how to plant that tree and the stories. And that's how it used to be. The older people and the younger people sitting there sharing a moment with country in a way leading it, but in the sense of today's word of trying to repair and regenerate. But it was a beautiful moment just to see that would have happened and still does happen, but nowhere near as much, where you've got an elder and a young child sitting there learning from planting a tree. It was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And our education system is not set up to do that anymore. Of having, and not everyone who's old is wise. We've got to admit that today. But having old people with wisdom and knowledge sitting and learning and sharing with a young person who is doing exactly the same thing, sharing, learning, listening. And that's probably one of my favourite moments out of many at the university, was just seeing that old way.
In fact, it's interesting, Anthony and Aunty Barbara. I mean, one of the things that's been completely missing from the education concept, if you like, even knowledge, is the idea of wisdom. I mean, it just doesn't exist. We talk about intelligence, we talk about knowledge, the knowledge economy, you know, AI, all of this productivity through knowledge, innovation, but the word wisdom simply disappeared as an aspiration for what we should aim for as the purpose of education. And I think the recovery of this idea of wisdom, I would love to see some leadership of that through the university sector, because it, you know, they've become so corporatized now that they've lost all credibility as a source of sort of inspiration to the meaning of life, if you like. They've become sort of knowledge factories for production. So how do we recover the wisdom idea as being the purpose of the education journey?
How do we put spirit back in?
Yeah.
Pretty simple. How do we put spirit back into science, into education, into teaching? How do you do it?
Well, I guess your institute here is one that's, at least within the Buddhist tradition, there is this idea. And it's then trying to make it, taking it outside a purely Buddhist view of it. I mean, it exists in Aboriginal culture as well. In fact, that's how I met Uncle Bob. I went to a workshop on Aboriginal wisdom culture, and that's how we met, because I was interested in what makes an elder. Coming from a Buddhist point of view, I wanted to know what was the wisdom tradition that sat with being an elder.
I knew Bob.
Did you? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I knew him quite well.
Yeah.
He worked a lot when we were doing the 2 years for the leading up to the national inquiry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so he did a lot of stuff in the territory.
Yeah.
I worked a lot with Link Up on that. Yeah, anyway, that's besides.
Yeah, well, he said the same thing as Anthony. He said, you don't become an elder just by getting old.
No.
You know, it's
That's-
about how much service you are to the community and what wisdom you
Yeah,
bring
that's
to that role.
There's senior people and there's elders.
Yeah.
And then then you can look at another version. You can look at another level, then you've got the wisdom and the eldership and the knowledge that's country holds.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
You know, if we, humans have lost their way, humans might not know anymore, but it's still all there in the landscape.
Yeah, I think that's
Still
what
the
makes
trees,
Australia so powerful is because
birds.
it's been sung to for so many thousands and thousands of years continuously that if you can learn to listen to this country and tune in, that recovery of wisdom. And now I think because there are Aboriginal elders and others who are articulating in a language that a modern mind can pay attention to, you know, so that, you know, it's a very fortunate time at the moment if only we tuned in. There's hope, I think, in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you happy for some questions? If there are any questions from our Zoomiverse and people so if you've got any questions, feel free to just unmute yourself and speak up if you're on Zoom, or put it in the chat, or if you're in the room, of course, just feel free to speak up.
Someone up there and somebody just had a hand up.
See a hand up.
Yesterday, when we discussed about today's workshop with my Professor Elizabeth, and then we raised the question of language and institutes. Because of like maybe English and also Chinese, it's take many long time. Like it's not as 70,000 years an Aboriginal knowledge, but like it's 1,000 years, and over the time that like the knowledge or the wisdom of Buddhism or any other knowledge when passing down through language, and to let that language survive comparatively to other, they need institutes. And like for like Western intelligence or knowledge, they need the colonization. So now we want to change or to shift the paradigm. So how you see the importance of language institute, and how like the role, like the traditional role of like the education system to combine with the new or either Buddhism or either Aboriginal, because we need a mean, skillful mean or obedient mean to transfer the knowledge. And I know about silence, but how about the language? Oh, the spoken and unspoken.
So do you want me to I'll just repeat the question. So it sounds like you're asking, you know, how do you see the importance and the role of institutionalized language and literacy to help preserve, you know, wisdom, teachings and Aboriginal knowledge? You know, how do you have both, and what do you see as the role of institutional language?
Destruction. That's my first reaction. That's the first gut reaction, is destruction. I think the work of the late George Orwell, he was an essayist along with being a novelist, and some of the stuff that he was writing about, particularly during the Franco War in what do you call it, the Civil War in Spain, which he was heavily involved in fighting against, and the fighting against the fascists in that thing. And he wrote a marvelous essay on language and the way language is used to, the institutionalized language is used to soften the blow, so to speak. And I say that cautiously, that I think like he would use the examples of the militarization of languages and how they use things like dispersal of the natives, because to say something like the destruction of the natives, the annihilation of the natives, is too harsh, and people might be upset with that. So to not upset, you go, they're dispersed. And it's still like military terms to this day. So just using that sort of thing as an example, the institutionalized language today is no different. It has that same principle behind it, to make something that is totally distasteful seem less distasteful or not distasteful, or not. It's regarded, I think, to put it in plain language and call it what it is seen to be distasteful to the masses, and I think that's it's used to justify policies, perhaps, to justify actions, that are not necessarily good ones. I think, yeah, justify a lot of ill intent.
Is it also your question was about the recovery of Aboriginal languages that were
okay.
suppressed? Because, one of the things the colonial regime did was deliberately destroy
Did I misunderstand?
Aboriginal languages and forbid them, and people were punished for speaking them.
Yeah.
And there is now a movement for the recovery of some of those languages.
Well, yeah, that's really good because, currently we've got wonderful sister Carol completing her PhD on that very thing with the Wadi Wadi language. Wadi Wadi language being here, like in close proximity to Sydney, we were at the forefront. Our mob here along the coast, we're at the forefront of the full colonial impact, the invasion impact. So things got destroyed and there were only fragments left. Carol's been interested in reconstituting and revitalising the Wadi Wadi language for many, many years. And she's finally just about completed her PhD on that. And I think that's that's just so wonderful that that's happening. In the meantime, language develops, and even though our native languages, the native Wadi Wadi language, for example, was wiped out, forbidden, it gets replaced with something, nature abhors a vacuum. So that vacuum fills up, and it fills up with what we call Aboriginal English, which was recognised in 1947 by Australian linguist Mitchell and Delbridge as a valid dialect form of English, the English language. So, but it's also grown, and we all know, Anthony would know, and I know, we don't always use Aboriginal English. We're not using it in this room here today. But when you're just sitting among a few of us, it flows. And
You're right there, Kat.
yeah, and so you create another one. And I know, for example, in the Northern Territory, and I studied this. I actually studied linguistics at university, and I learned this through that study about the development of different language forms in the Northern Territory, and whether those people that had contact with white fellas up there, and they were made to speak English. Well, you just can't go from one language to another, and by the flick of a switch, that doesn't happen. So the first thing that happened is pidgin. You learn a pidgin English. What is pidgin? What does that mean? Pidgin is a language expression that is devoid of grammar, right? But what the linguists, their study had found after many, many years in the territory was where a remote group of people had contact with white fellas, that they went through pidgin, but within one generation, the speakers of pidgin developed that language and developed a grammar which is called Creole, which they spell Kriol, right? Now, currently on television, on SBS, there's, or Net TV, I'm not sure which one or the other. There's little programs called Barumba Kids, and it's like actual children engaging in everyday life, and they're speaking Creole, and it is subtitled on the bottom in Creole. And I think, but in one generation, they went from their own language to Pidgin English to Creole in one generation.
Yeah, well, as you know, in Papua New Guinea, Melanesian
Yeah,
Pidgin is the dominant language.
yeah,
No.
but that developed into they developed a grammar into
That's
that.
right. It went exactly that process you
Yeah,
talked about.
yeah.
It's a Creole form now, and it's the
Yeah.
dominant language of the country.
So,
Yeah.
so that's one aspect. And I'm not sure if I've answered your question.
Can I just also add a couple of things, is that our nouns are not nouns, they're verbs.
Yeah,
And that changes how you see the language, that it's not a thing or it's a whatever, it's an adverb or a doing thing, verb, like a tree, whatever. It's a living entity. It's
I think that's such an important point, Anthony, because the English language is very thing-based. So people experience reality as a lot of things.
and a
And
military.
with Chinese, I believe, is much more process, more verbal. And as you said, like languages that are more verbal capture the impermanence and creativity of life. Whereas English, and I don't know about other European languages because I'm not a linguist, they trap it into static things, which they then try and link together. So, because language encodes culture, it encodes the way you see
all the
reality.
concepts of culture are encoded in language.
And then
Mm.
another thing to put a twist to people's thinking is that in a way, how I've been taught to teach is we're teaching language. So the language is the text of the land, how the land speaks without voice. So we're teaching that language, and you've got to understand that language of the land and the sky and the water before you can speak tongue.
Mm.
So that's how I've been taught, and there's different views, and that's fine. I've been taught how to teach the language. There's other mob who've been taught by their elders to teach what they call language, but I call tongue.
Mm.
So you've got the language of the landscape, and then you've got tongue. But if you can't speak tongue, if you don't know the language, and just for example, if I was going to learn Japan or Japanese, I'd have to go to Japan to learn it so I could learn the language and the tongue, not just the
Mm.
tongue. If I was taught here in Australia, I'd be just learning or whatever people call language now. So, and also language in today's context, which I'm calling tongue, is also being used as power. I know the language, or I know the tongue, so I am now the authority. Not the elders, not the landscape, but the person, because I know now, but they might not know the language that goes with the tongue. So you've got this, again, we're going back to the political, we're going back to the separation, we're going back to the colonial state that we've got to try and unlearn. And maybe this is just the process of that unlearning, is having to go through that, the politics of it, or the harm.
Well, Anthony, do you think because today so much, we're all grappling with the problem of so-called misinformation and disinformation, and people are struggling to know what it is that you can know through the medium of language, that what you're talking about actually becomes more and more significant. So it's a re-engagement with the sensate, which country is teacher, which you can't get from social media, either information, disinformation, or propaganda. So it's a much more primal way of of engaging with knowing.
Well, a tree won't lie to you. A bird won't deceive you.
Mm,
Um,
that's right.
so we've got to come back. Yeah.
Mm.
As I often talk about, and I don't mind repeating because that's how I was taught. If we look at the one thing that brings whatever background you are, whatever country, nationality that you are, or whatever language that you hold, the one thing that brings us all together is what?
Place where we are.
Country, yeah, the land, the country. We breathe the same air, we drink the same water, we walk the same landscape. So what's the one thing that brings us all together?
Yeah, the unifying force. Mm.
Yeah, nature, or whatever you want to call it. So it's, you know, we should be at the university. Everyone knows what's happening at the university, and a woman who's possibility of losing her job, she said something to me. So, well, yeah, we're working for the wrong entity, aren't we? We're working for a human instead of working for the one thing that provides everything for us. We've, as you've stated many a time, we've got it, excuse my language, upside, I was going to say arse up, but upside down. We've got things upside down, but an arse is useful. And has a role and has a purpose. We can't separate it. So language is so important. And how we look at language, how we use language. And you said earlier about the separating, I call it the separating slash, the separating binary of man and woman. And man or woman and nature. There's a separating slash. And what I was lucky enough to be taught by a cultural teaching, but also then seeing it in country itself, was the umbilical cord of connectedness. And so instead of looking at a binary in separation, you look at it in connectedness. So man, woman. And the most simple thing is I was born by a woman. I've never seen a man pregnant or give birth. So I'm born from a woman. So I must hold, as a male, I must hold that feminine. I am that feminine. And when I'm first conceived, I think science showed that I am female. So I hold that. And then vice versa, the feminine, the male has a role in it, and a part to it. So as a feminine, you also hold the male, not the separating binary or slash that separates us. So that again can change it. And again, you bring it back to Mother Earth. We will not resolve the violence between male and female until we stop the violence towards Mother Earth.
Mm.
And if we continue that violence to Mother Earth, and we'll continue to represent that in the human realm. And Uncle Greg spoke about that very strongly one day. And yeah, so that's, and he got told on a radio station that he can't say that.
Which is a bit like red rag to a bull.
Mm.
Well, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there's the symbol of the wrathful mother, you know, and that's the wrath of the mother when violated is, and, you know, for many ways you could read extreme weather events as the wrathful mother on human hubris, you know, that we can use science to control the whole of creation because we can, you know, map all of its laws and recreate it in the science lab, and we can manage all the fallout through our human ownership of everything.
Human sense.
And that's sort of ignoring that we are part of something much bigger than ourselves. And that just invites the wrath of the mother, you know, because it violates the actual law that underpins the whole of creation.
And that violence happens all the time, and I contribute to it because of the world that we live in. I start up my car. and I drive, and I probably kill, I don't know how many insects I kill each morning. So I'm not saying I'm separate. Because of the modern world, I'm part of it. So, the devastation that we're seeing at University of Wollongong at the moment, where they're trying to reduce a few deaths of humans, which is, I understand, but they killed millions and millions of insects and birds and trees to save a handful of lives of people with a new bypass or highway. Instead of sitting down and placing country centre instead of the human, what do we need to do to save a few human lives that won't impact on every other living thing? And then we're wondering why at the university there's chaos and there's pain and it's so negative there at the moment.
Mm.
But to me, you can't disconnect what we did to nature is now then happening to us at the university. There is a clear connection there. So I don't know, we need to have these discussions, and do we then just ask people to slow down, that everyone goes 40 k's down that mountain instead of trucks? What other ways can we do instead of destroying so many living entities?
I mean, I think it's a parallel conversation that's come up because of
Education.
bushfires, so that cultural burning replaces that sort of militaristic idea of how you defeat fires through planes and armies of volunteers. Instead, you fire the country continuously through people who understand local ecology. So that
I have an issue with that too.
what's your issue?
We don't have a fire problem in Australia. We have a water problem.
Mm. A water problem.
We have a water problem
And
because the
shortage of
water's been taken out of the system.
Mm.
We do need cultural burning, but we've got to resolve the water problem.
Yeah. And that's all the dams and irrigation systems. Yeah.
Irrigation system, the hard hooves animals, the remover of the tillers that turned over the lyrebirds and the little marsupials that dig into the ground, all those little things that contributed to keeping the landscape soft and as a sponge, not a compacted hard thing where you got millions of sheep contacting. And I love lamb, I had it on the weekend. But then you got kangaroos that are soft-footed, that big long jumps, soft compared to millions of hard hoofed animals compacting where we never had hard hoofed.
Mm.
So again, instead of trying to send a man to the moon or to Mars, those billions of dollars of, okay, how do we take care of the water? And then we can bring in cultural burning. So I'm not against cultural burning.
It's just not enough.
The balance is not there anymore.
Well, as we know, waters all around the world now, fresh water is one of the critical things that is going to impact on landscape and human habitation and the life of all creatures, because we've put it in jeopardy everywhere because of industrial agriculture.
Well, 70% of the world's drinking water is in plastic bottles.
Really? Is that true?
Hmm.
Wow.
I think we need to just probably end the Zoom call for people who are needing to leave at 1:30. And unfortunate that we need to follow this kind of rigid time, but I do feel that this is something I'm going to be dining out on for quite a long time. I really appreciated all of the words of wisdom and silence. There's a lot of messages in the chat to say thank you. Afraid we didn't have time to get to a couple of the questions on the chat, but really grateful for this connection and this reminder of the connection that's always there.
Thank you.
And so for
Thank you.
those, yep, so this will very likely be put online, the recording, so you can Google NTI Conversations in a few weeks and it will be there.
Thank you for listening.
And so again, thank you to our three wonderful guests and to everybody who joined us, and wish you a lovely week.
Thank you so very, very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to NTI for hosting this.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you for listening.
Hi, Leona.
That's our friend up in
Thank you.
Blackheath. Yeah.
It's been wonderful. Yeah, yeah. So
Thank you.
I hope there's a chance again to listen.
Yeah.
Or
Thank you. Okay, so bye for everybody. I'm going to end the call now and we'll see you on the other side.